I represent a big swath of Southwestern Pennsylvania. It's unique in that we have a significant concentration of national leaders in healthcare, energy, financial services, and manufacturing. In fact, it's hard for me to think of another region of the country that has the number of leaders across these fields that Southwestern Pennsylvania does. I think that every regulation that requires a private sector entity to undertake a certain action and expend funds can rightly be called a tax. The Small Business Administration has stated that the cost of compliance with the current regulatory framework that we have is over $1.75 trillion. We're competing in a world economy. And I think that overburdening regulations, along with higher taxes, as well as other costs being passed along to employers, such as through the Affordable Care Act, are strangling our economy. The fourth quarter we saw a contraction, and we see unemployment chronically high, and wages are stagnant. So I do think that we need to be taking a look at what's going on with the regulatory framework. I'm looking at a list of regulations that are on the deck at EPA, and very concerned about what the impact is going to be on the ability of our job creators. A little bit, Professor Glicksman, I'd like to go, a little bit about the REINS Act that you had mentioned, and a concern about interjection of politics. I'm a little puzzled by that, and I wonder if you could maybe elaborate on that. I look at, under our constitutional framework, that the legislative branch is the lawmaking. We have the responsibility. I mean, if you take your analysis, isn't every piece of legislation that we put out of here has some kind of political background?
Yeah, certainly it does. And I'm not disputing the fact that Congress has the responsibility and the right to make legislative policy, which is based in part upon political judgments. My point was simply that the detailed regulatory decisions made by agencies such as EPA are based upon the information provided by experts such as toxicologists and epidemiologists. I've been teaching and writing about environmental law for 35 years. I don't have the technical expertise to know whether a particular air quality standard ought to be set at 0.08 parts per million or 0.075 parts per million. That's beyond my expertise.
And do you think it's beyond the expertise of this body to pull the experts in to ask questions so that we can understand that too, or do we have to have elites over in the agencies telling us this?
I wouldn't call agency members elites. I think they're experts, and they've been delegated authority by Congress precisely so that Congress is relieved of the burden of making detailed technical judgments.
Relieved of the burden or relieved of the responsibility to evaluate that?
I say relieved of the burden. If you determine that an agency is not operating pursuant to the mandate that you delegated to the agency, you certainly have the right to amend the statute to change the agency's mandates and authorities. But it seems to me that making the kind of technical judgments reflected in the regulations that are issued on a daily basis by agencies is going to swamp Congress. I don't think realistically, practically, there's any way to do an adequate job overseeing the details of every regulation issued by federal agencies in a timely manner.
Well, we can, Dr. Holtz-Eakin, I'd like to follow up on you. You mentioned Fannie and Freddie, and there were attempts under the Bush administration to provide some further regulations for Fannie and Freddie, weren't there?
Yeah. When I was CBO director, there were a number of initiatives to change the special provisions that surrounded the housing GSEs, and most importantly, to increase the capital requirements. They were very thinly capitalized entities.
And then, you look at, gentlemen like former Congressman Frank, who wanted to, quote, roll the dice with Fannie and Freddie. Any idea what he was talking about there?
I won't speak on behalf of the former congressman, but I think the reality was, and there are CBO reports to this fact, it was predictable that there was a very high probability that the taxpayers would have to step in, and history has shown it happened quicker than even we thought it would.
Mr. Weissman, any idea what Congressman Frank would have been talking about when he wanted to roll the dice with Fannie and Freddie?
No, and I'll follow the example of not wanting to speak for him. But I agree with your point, and I think that it's correct that they were undercapitalized and underregulated.
Any thoughts, Dr. Holtz-Eakin, on efforts such as the REINS Act to have the Congress really exercise its constitutional responsibility when it comes to the lawmaking responsibility within this government?
It is standard practice in Congress to authorize activities for finite amounts of time, to do oversight of those activities, and then to decide whether to reauthorize or not. This strikes me as entirely consistent with that way of doing business, and I know that there's concern about the relative balance of benefits and costs, which is the fundamental legitimate issue, but I don't see, if Congress is involved on a regular basis, how that can get too far out of whack. In fact, I think that helps keep the broad measure of benefits and costs in balance.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
I yield back.